Hello, everybody. Welcome to another course, a part of UMortgage's Financial Literacy Week. My name is Isabella, and I will be taking you through our topic of interest and APR today. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we're all familiar with the webinar features offered on Zoom. For the purpose of the search for this session, we have turned off your camera and microphone, so you don't have to worry about those. This is kind of a one-way communication, but for time to time, I might ask you either your opinion or your thoughts. So you will use the chat section whenever I am asking for what your thoughts and what you have to say are. At the end of the session, we're going to have a Q&A. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature. And then when it's time for that portion, I will ask you to submit any other questions that you might have. And again, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to do that. So now that we know these expectations and what to do, we can get started. The other thing I want to talk about before we talk about anything else is I want us all to be aware I am not a financial advisor. This content in the training is for educational purposes only. The material does not take into account your particular financial objectives, situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. In order to make the best financial decisions that suit your needs, you should conduct your own research and seek the advice of a licensed financial advisor if necessary. But with that in mind, let's continue on. Like I said, we are going to be covering interest and APR today. Before we get into the content, I want to get our brains warmed up a little. You just saw fade into the screen 3 switches, a door, and 3 light bulbs. What could that mean? Well, imagine that you are in a room that has those 3 switches and the door is closed. The switches control the 3 light bulbs on the other side of the door. Once you open the door, you may never touch the switches again. But how can you definitively tell which switch is connected to each of the light bulbs? Take a minute to think about this, and once you have your answer, share it in the chat. Anyone have any guesses yet? Think they figured it out? Give another 30 seconds. Good, getting some good answers. So if you didn't get the answer to this, some people were kind of getting close, but don't worry, it's kind of a tricky one. Exactly, Gary, you want to turn on the bulbs and see how hot they are after a couple minutes. But that was a tricky one. But there's definitely one thing that I know for sure, and our brains are probably warmed up, so we can go see what we are going to be learning today. Our learning agenda, or our goals for today's session, are to differentiate between interest rates and APR, and then to review an amortization schedule. But now that we know what is coming in the course, we can head into what the difference is between our topics of interest and APR. Interest, APR, the rates are rising, then they're falling. There are so many different percentages. It can be dizzying, just like all of the information that just entered your screen. But what does it all mean? The good thing is we're going to break this down over the course. In the chat, I want you to share what you think you know about these topics or what comes to mind. It could be anything. Maybe what you know about interest from your credit cards, or what you know about APR and how rates can fluctuate. Like I said, whatever comes to mind, share that in the chat for the next 30 seconds to a minute. And interest rates have been a hot topic as of late too, so this is very timely. We are going to be going into a lot of different topics today, any of which maybe come to mind for any of you when you think about interest rates and APR. And we're really going to break this down piece by piece. Before we get into any detail, we have to start with the foundation and define the first of our two terms, interest. The definition of interest is money paid regularly at a particular rate for the use of money lent or for denying the repayment of a debt. What does that exactly mean? When you borrow money, there's a cost. So simply put, interest is the cost of borrowing that money. Now we know what the basic function of interest is, we can talk about how it works. At its core, there is a simple formula that we can use to identify how interest works and how much interest a person will pay in their loan. The simple formula for measuring interest is starting with the principal, aka the amount you are borrowing. You then multiply that by the interest rate. We'll show you an example of this in a moment, but the way that you enter the interest rate into your calculator is important. It will always be a decimal. For example, a 5% interest rate would be entered into your calculator as 0.05. You get there by dividing the percentage, or in this case 5, by 100, and that gives you 0.05. The last step of our equation is to multiply that by the time. You can do this yearly or monthly depending on your loan. But don't worry, we have plenty of examples so you can see how this formula really works. Working through this example, we'll see we start with our principal or the loan amount, which is $5,000. The interest rate on this loan is 5%, which we'll enter into our calculator as 0.05. And then finally, this is a 3-month loan, so we need to multiply it by 3. The calculation comes out to $750, and we're going to go into how this looks across several different examples throughout this course. The first example we'll dive into is one we typically talk about with interest, credit cards. Credit cards are a staple of life. It's often the building block of your credit score, and this can allow us to make other purchases like a car or a home later in life. In our situation, we're going to meet RJ and learn about his credit card. Here we have RJ. We're going to take a look at his credit card bill to see how interest works. RJ currently has a $2,000 balance on his credit card bill, and his interest rate is 10%. He knows if he pays back the full balance at the end of the month, he won't owe any interest on the bill, but he's not able to, and he will have to pay his balance back over time. Let's see how interest will play out in his situation. He has determined that he can make a $60 payment per month to get to the credit card down payment. His remaining balance after the first payment will be $1,940. He will also be charged $16.66 in interest for carrying over his balance into the next month. You're likely wondering, what are the long-term effects of RJ making his $60 payments to repay the balance? The good thing is we're thinking the same thing, and the results may be a bit surprising. So what are those long-term effects of that $60 payment? It will take him 39 months to pay back that balance, and it'll cost him $2,332 to pay off that original $2,000 balance, with a whopping $332 in interest. If you're like me, you're thinking that's a lot of money, and this example really speaks to how interest works in situations like credit cards and how paying back small amounts can have detrimental effects. Imagine if the number was $5,000 or $10,000. The amount you pay towards the interest would increase significantly. If you have a credit card, you may be thinking about something else you see in your statements, which is called APR. We'll revisit RJ and APR later, and there are some scenarios where specific credit cards will give you a first year without any APR, and then you can it'll come in later, but we'll get into APR, like I said, later in the course, so just keep RJ's situation lingering in the back of your mind. Interest, though, is not always bad for us, and there are actually times where it can work in our favor. The examples where interest can work in our favor is in a savings account. We're going to meet our next person, Amy, and we'll explore her experience dealing with interest in her savings account. Here we can see Amy has a savings account with her local bank. Currently, she has $10,000 saved. Her bank offered her an interest rate at 3.5%. Unlike our first example with the credit cards, the aspect of interest works in Amy's favor. As Amy's interest is calculated, we'll use the same formula we learned at the beginning of this session, and what we'll adjust for is calculating it per year. Over the course of 1 year, Amy will earn $350. With savings account, you may also hear this referred to as your APY or your annual percentage yield. Simply put, this is the yield or money you get in return annually. Amy is demonstrating one of our core concepts of our Financial Literacy Week, and by using her money intelligently, she can have her money work for her positively instead of negatively against her. Although a savings account is an easy way to earn some interest, there's better ways to generate wealth from your savings, and you'll have to stay tuned for future courses on investing. It's time to flip things around and have you analyze an interest situation. You're out shopping for a new car. You won't be able to pay for the whole car in cash, but interest rates are low and you feel comfortable with taking out an auto loan. You've done all the painstaking work of test driving the cars, debating options, and haggling the best price that you can find. The contract is on the table and you're reading it over. You see that the price of the vehicle is $40,000 with a 2% interest rate. Everything so far is looking good. You can continue down and see what you'll be paying for the vehicle over 72 months or 5 years. Still not too bad. One question does linger in the back of your mind though as you review the contract and hesitate to grab the pen to sign. How much am I paying in interest that will add on to the vehicle cost? Well, lucky for you, you now know the formula. So let's figure this out. How much are you paying in interest over the 5 years for a new car? And when you have the answer, or you think you have the answer, drop it in the chat. I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to try to calculate this one if anyone feels really good at math. Kaylee, that is a great guess. You're a little high, but that is correct. We have $4,000. That would bring the total cost of the vehicle to $44,000. This is an important consideration when shopping for anything associated with the loan and how much the true cost of the item will be. There's a little more we need to learn with interest though, and that other thing that we're about to learn about works in tandem with it. What ties in with interest is APR. Probably a word that you've heard of, but may not know exactly what it is. And don't worry, you are not alone on that. APR stands for annual percentage rate, which represents the yearly interest charged on a loan. You're probably thinking that definitely relates to the interest rates. Heck, the word interest is in the definition, and we can simplify this even more for you. To break this down, APR is the margin or the fees that are charged for using a company's lending product. This is the extra bit of interest that is tacked on to the interest rate to summarize all that you will pay. You may be a person like me who needs to see it in order to learn it, and luckily we have that for you too. Looking at this graphic, think of APR as filling the glass of the overall interest cup. Now that we know what APR is, we can break it down and how it works. As it works in tandem with interest rates, you'll also see APR displayed as a percentage. For example, if you are looking at a contract for a credit card, you will see that they display interest and also APR. A typical example of this will be that the interest rate is displayed at 8% and the APR is 10%, like in our example on the screen. The key thing though to note is that you will not add these together to create the overall APR. In our example, the overall APR would be the displayed 10% and not 18%. You can see this in that second bullet point as APR encompasses all interest and fees associated or related to the loan. Now that we are in the know about APR, we can review some examples of how it works. There's a good chance you are going to see some familiar faces too. Let's welcome back RJ. He paid off his $2,000 balance from earlier and fortunately decided to make more than the minimum balance payment. In the first year of having a credit card, RJ was only responsible for paying the interest rate on the card, which could like I said, be a perk that's offered by many credit card companies. Now that he has passed his first year with the credit card, he's now responsible for the APR rate, as you see in his bill. He recently moved and racked up some moving expenses on his credit card, which I'm sure we're all familiar with that pain. We saw the impact of when RJ only had to pay the interest on his $2,000 bill. Now we will examine of the impact of the balance with the APR. We'll do the same breakdown with RJ that we did earlier to really see the impact of APR. As a side note, we're hoping that you are learning that paying off as much as possible as a credit card balance is important to save yourself some money. So RJ is going to make a $75 payment towards his $6,000 debt. He has a remaining balance of $5,925. The interest he will accrue is $99.99. As you can guess, based on our prior experience in the course, the racking up of interest could be a painful one. So let's just rip off the Band-Aid and go see what this is going to look like for him. So if he continues to only contribute $75 per month to his $6,000 charges, what does that look like? Unfortunately, it is going to be pretty rough for him. It will take him 96 months to pay back his balance if he continues making that $75 payment. Yeah, you heard that right, 96 months or 8 whole years. It only gets worse. It will cost him $12,069.04 to repay his balance with interest. That means that he is paying $6,069.04 more than his original balance in interest alone. The situation where we can feel the true sting of paying back interest. Those commercials you see about consolidating or reducing credit card debt probably make a lot of more sense now. When credit card debt is racked up, it can be daunting to pay back. And credit cards aren't the only situation in which APR is in play. Aaliyah just bought her first home. For her, we are going to see how APR works in terms of a mortgage. She recently bought a home for $350,000. As she was reviewing her mortgage options, she determined the best deal available to her was a mortgage that offered her a 3.5% interest rate and an APR of 4%. Some of the other details of Aaliyah's mortgage will give us the full picture of APR. Aaliyah's mortgage breakdown is a monthly payment of $1,572, and she's paying back this loan over the course of a 30-year fixed payment, which is pretty typical for most people that are buying a home. What is the impact of all of this? Let's see how much she will be paying in interest over the course of her loan. Looking at the impact of APR or interest in general for Aaliyah's home, there's quite an impact. Over the course of the 30 years, Aaliyah will pay back $251,543 in interest, which breaks down to $8,384 per year. The principal remains unchanged as it is the balance of the home. So, measuring the overall impact, she will pay $601,543. This seems like a lot to process, and you are not wrong. Luckily, there is a process for Aaliyah and others who make fixed rate payments back towards a loan, and that will help break down our schedule. The process that helps break down fixed payments towards a loan like Aaliyah's is the process of amortization. Amortization is the process of reducing or paying the debt with regular payments. Amortization will create a schedule of how the breakdown of the loan amount and interest is paid per month. But before we break down all of that, I just want to simplify our definition. We are working with the simplified definition, and that means we are going to break it down. In breaking it down, there are a few key items that define the process. First, it's a loan that with a clearly defined end date. Think of her mortgage or the car payment example. Those loans have a clear end date, unless they make extra early payments, which if that's the case, that's awesome. Amortization doesn't take place on RJ's credit card, and the payment will vary depending on what he spends and ultimately what he can afford to pay back. What does vary in amortization is the amount you pay towards the interest and principal each month. Even though the two amounts vary, the overall monthly payment will remain the same, and we'll show you what that looks like in an amortization table or a schedule seen here. On the screen is what a typical amortization schedule will look like. You'll have a breakdown of how much is paid towards interest, principal, and the overall balance remaining on the loan. As you can see, the amount varies in the interest and principal paid each month. Amortization calculates the most efficient way to pay back the loan in a timely manner. So let's go visit Aaliyah again and see how amortization is working for her. Here we are with Aaliyah again in her home purchase of $350,000. This mix of bar and line graphs will demonstrate how amortization works over the 30 years of her loan. We'll see the loan in the y-axis of the chart and the year running across the bottom or the x-axis. You'll see the black dotted line slicing downward across our chart. This is the balance that is remaining on the loan. Finally, you will see the bar graphs splitting in color between a dark and a light blue. These correspond to what is paid in principal in dark blue and what is paid in interest in light blue. What this does is summarize where her money is going in terms of repaying her loan. If we revisit the car loan you were interested in earlier, I wonder what amortization looks like there. And we are actually going to look at that. So here you are. You have your new car, you have the loan that goes with it. Our chart displays the information the exact same way as the example with Aaliyah. We can see what stands out here is how quickly the loan gets paid down. Likely you bought it at the right time and that worked so well in your favor. You scored a good interest rate and the car actually has a microchip. Amortization gives you the ability to see the big picture of your loan amount, especially if you're comparing loan options to see what best fit is for you. I'm going to give you a challenge to plug the numbers into an amortization schedule and look at it for yourself. Say hi to Zoe. She's found a home she wants to buy, and she's looking through her loan options. She thinks she found the best loan for her, and she's asking if you can run the amortization schedule for her. So in a moment, check the chat, and you will see we added a link that you can use to run an amortization schedule. And I will give you all a moment to open that before we continue. So the link to the calculator just was set in the chat. I'll give you all just another moment to get that pulled up and we will run through our example. So we are going to go ahead and plug in the numbers to the tool you now have open. The loan amount is $225,000. The APR is 3.1%, which you will plug in as the interest rate, and the term is 30 years. Finally, you can set the start date as today. You can go ahead and press the calculate button and you'll run your schedule. Under the graph, you will see the line by line schedule. And this is where I have a question for you. When you go ahead and find the answer, type it in the chat. What year would Zoe begin paying more interest towards the principal and less more towards the principal and less towards the interest? So look for that year where she's going to start paying more money towards the principal of the loan and she's going to be paying less towards the interest. And when you think you found it, send it in the chat. And for the year, what is the actual calendar year? Gonna give everyone a little bit longer, see if anyone has any guesses. So for those of you who may have found the answer to be 2030, you would be correct. In that year, she is going to contribute $5,887.69 towards the principal and $5,641.79 towards the interest. This is the first time the principal amount is larger than the interest amount. And we've done some tremendous learning throughout this entire process. So let's talk a little bit more about this and review what we learned. Like I said, we have covered a lot about interest rates, APR, amortization, and I want to make sure that we can recap all of the important pieces of this that we talked about, and then make sure we're able to answer all of the questions that you might have. So to circle back on our first topic, interest versus APR, they're the same, but a little bit different, right? You could say that, or more so, that they work hand in hand. The graphic is a great way to think about APR. The interest rate is that base amount you are charged for the loan, and the APR is the fees and the margins attached to the loan provider. Remember that you don't add up the two rates when you see them displayed in the loan information. For example, you might see an interest rate listed in a car loan at 2% and the APR at 3%. That 3% is the overall rate charged to you. One more thing before we allow some time for everybody to ask some questions that I want to make sure we review. Our last piece is, again, our amortization. This is where the chart will calculate the breakdown of the interest and the principal that is paid. It's such a great tool to use when you are comparing loan offers and seeing what works best for you. There are some great resources to use that can show you what happens to the amortization schedule if you make some early payments too. If it can have a large effect on the interest that you pay and when the loan will be paid off. But I want to have some time for you all to ask some questions. And before I do that, I want to make sure that I just give the reminder again, we are not financial advisors. I'm going to answer any questions that you might have to the best of all of your abilities. And like I said, you can send any of those questions in the Q&A portion in that little button on the bottom. So, what questions do you have? We have a couple questions come in. The first one that I want to address, somebody asked, how are interest rates calculated? So it can vary with the type of loan that you are getting. Usually for credit cards, it's a set rate for everyone who applies for the card. Auto and home loans will have their interest rates determined kind of by a combination of the customer and the market conditions. But on the customer side, they'll look at your credit score and down payment if it is a situation where you are making one. On the other side, they'll use what the Fed has for set interest rates to borrow the money in conjunction with the loan type and how much money you are borrowing. So I hope that answered your question. Another question that just came in, we've seen multiple APRs listed for transactions on their credit card. So why is that? APR can be kind of a confusing situation sometimes for people, and it is also a fluid situation with credit cards. They can change you to a different APR for different types of transactions. For example, a credit card might start with a 0% intro APR rate for 15 months, and then maybe it becomes 15%. Or the credit card might offer a cash advantage option, but then the APR would be 22%. So that's kind of the reason behind those varying APR rates. And you'll have to look at the fine print of each card to really understand how they charge it, because really no credit card or product is going to be the same. Another question, our final question that I just saw come in, do you pay interest on a down payment? And the answer is no. You will never owe interest on a down payment, and the money that is used, that is basically just what you are bringing, and that will be how much you are taking out on the loan. So you never owe interest on the down payment. You just owe interest on the money that is being taken out for the loan. What other questions do you all have on interest and APR? Alrighty. If anybody has any other lingering questions, I definitely recommend to do your research, and we will, of course, if there are any other lingering questions we didn't get to or anything that comes in after the fact, we will reach out. But I want to thank you all for your attendance and your participation. Our next session is student loans at 6 p.m. and we will pause some resources in the chat so you can take those away from our time together. But again, otherwise, stay tuned as we have our next session at 6 p.m., which is student loans. I hope you all have a great day.